Sup snakes? As you can tell by the title, I took the map that appeared briefly on screen in Fallout on Prime, pulled it into GIS software, and now you can get a general idea of if there is a vault near you, if that's ever something that you have wondered. So we're going to quickly go through the United States to find out the answer to that question. I'll tell you a little bit about the mapping that I did and where I want this project to go. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm really excited about this, and I hope you guys enjoy. This was a lot of work. I do have it up on my Discord if you want to poke around. It's continually being updated. So I know there are some little things here and there that aren't perfect, but IGN just posted an article about it. So I figured I better get this video out ASAP. So that's what we're doing. Okay, so very briefly, a little bit of background if you're not a geographer. This is ArcGIS Pro, a mapping software that is pretty commonly used in GIS processing and creating maps. It is pretty much the industry standard, although there are a few others that are you can access as a public, like QGIS, but I used Pro because that's what I know. I'm a geographer, and this is like what we use in industry. I took essentially the map of Fallout from the show of all of the vaults in the boardroom scene, as well as a few other versions of the map, and I can show you those now, like this one, just to get those locations in Florida that weren't visible. That was essentially what I did to make this, and I pulled it into this software and geo-referenced it. And by geo-referenced, I mean I took this image of this map and I tried to match it up as best as I could with real world locations. Something like here you can see in Louisiana, or especially over here in Baja California, was super helpful for this project because it's very easily seen and the geography of it is very easily seen. And what you do essentially is you take reference points from the image and then reference points from the base map, which this is just a Bing base map that kind of is a default. And you go, okay, that's there, and it'll stretch and distort the map so it looks good, essentially. And here you have it. As a result of this, obviously the stuff in the south is a little bit more visible, so that's probably going to be the more accurate locations, whereas the stuff up north, a little bit harder to see due to the glare. I did use other images, as I said, but it only goes so far north and is only so accurate. Plus, the vaults are not illuminated during this sequence, so it is kind of difficult to see perfectly. But that said, that's what I did in ArcGIS Pro. But because ArcGIS Pro is a industry use, you need a license to use it. It's expensive license. It's not user friendly unless you have hours and hours of training like I do. I'm getting my master's in geography to use this. It's not accessible to the public. So what I did was export it into Google Earth, and that's accessible to you. And here is what that looks like. It's a pretty simplified way of viewing a map. This is not by any means a standard that you should be utilizing for mapping or thinking of as like a professional mapping software. Although I will say a number of the companies that I've worked for use Google Earth despite having the money to not use Google Earth. So it is a good, cheap, free tool that you can use for mapping. Just throwing that out there. All right, so it's time to poke around Google Earth. This is what it looks like. Obviously, it is warped and distorted because it's geo-referenced. So this was obviously a perfectly rectangular image, but now, of course, the Earth is a spheroid. It is going to be, bended and warped. But let's get into it. So in California, we have the highest number of vaults, which I thought was really interesting. Obviously, there are potential for some of these vaults to be representative of multiple vaults, mostly because it is such small points of light. Like, there could be more in these areas. There could be multiple. There's some that are missing in this map, in my opinion. But California does have the most. As you can see, we have the Southern California vaults. We have some in San Diego area. We have some in the Valley. And then, of course, some around the Bay Area, possibly Sacramento, north of Sacramento. And then what I found was interesting was there appears to be one in Eureka, California, north. Next up, we have Oregon, which had Portland. And then outside of Portland, which I'm going to say is... it's hard to say, but I'm thinking it's Salem. It is slightly distorted just because of this map projection, so it's not perfect. Washington, we had a vault in Seattle. We had a vault towards the southern part of Washington. It's impossible, again, to say specifically, but I'm going to say it's towards the border with Oregon. And then one that was pretty clearly meant to be in Spokane. Again, this area of this map is the most distorted just because I had less things to geo-reference it with. I will be improving it in days to come, so continue to check back. Interestingly enough, we got one in Canada. It is right on the border of 2 states in Canada, so I'm not or provinces. I'm not fully sure which one it's in, but yes, we have a vault in Canada. But don't forget, they did annex Canada in the lore of Fallout. Idaho, we have one in Boise, and then we have one in eastern Idaho. I was thinking like Idaho Falls was probably the most logical spot for that to be. And then we have 2 in Montana, one near Billings, and one kind of more in the mountains, it kind of seemed like. In Wyoming, it appears we have either 1 or 2. There's one right on the border. It was difficult to say for certain. And those are the 2 general areas that these are in. In Utah, of course, Salt Lake City. And then we had one that was near the border of Utah and Colorado. It's not exactly perfect, but I think it gives you a general idea. Now in Arizona, we had one that appeared to be Flagstaff, north of Flagstaff area. I thought that one was pretty interesting. I'm not going to say definitively that it is in Grand Canyon Junction or anything like that, but it was very close to Flagstaff, which is worth considering. And then we had another one in the more southern part of the state. I want to say that this is Phoenix, but it almost seems like it is meant to be outside of Phoenix. And considering that this is the more accurate part of the map, it's hard to say. Next over, we had New Mexico. I believe that Santa Fe or Albuquerque area is where this generally is trying to be. And then one right on the border. Moving upwards, Colorado, we had Denver and Colorado Springs. I think these 2 are pretty accurate. Wyoming, I think I already did Wyoming, so we're good there. North Dakota, got a vault. Good for North Dakota, I guess. Like, I was kind of surprised to see some of these smaller, more rural, kind of empty states have vaults. I do think they're based on population, but it's interesting. And then South Dakota. South Dakota got a lot of vaults. Sioux City, Grand Rapids, and then I'm not for certain where this one is because it kind of is in the middle of nowhere, but maybe it is accurate. Again, this part of the U.S. is not the most perfect. Next up, we had Nebraska, right on the border here. It's difficult to say if this is Nebraska or not. And then we also had 2 that were more east. Again, not going to say definitively that these are the exact locations, but you get an idea. Kansas, it appears we either have 2 or 3 vaults, and those are in these general areas. I believe that the Topeka one seems pretty right. And then Kansas City, I feel like is accurate, but again, there's imperfections when you take a screenshot of a map and then pull it into something like this. Oklahoma, Tulsa, and Oklahoma City, those seemed right to me. Texas, these guys seemed pretty right to me. We had Odessa, this general area. Fort Worth, Dallas probably has multiple, but again, these dots are so zoomed out that it's impossible to say for certain. Then Austin clearly had a vault like nearly dead center on it. And again, this is like the more accurate area of the map just because I had more things to geo-reference it with. So I'm going to say that these are pretty accurate, and they seem it because they're kind of lining up with cities. San Antonio, Corpus Christi, and then we had a ton in Houston area, like multiple. Obviously, we have had some semi-canon games take place in Texas, so I'm wondering, I don't know what they pulled to make this map, but it is kind of interesting to note that. Louisiana, New Orleans made sense to me, and then Baton Rouge also made sense to me. So those 2 locations seem pretty accurate. Mississippi, we had Jackson area, I think that felt pretty accurate. Arkansas, dead center of the state. I'm going to say it's definitely a Little Rock. Next up, we're going to move into Missouri. I have plotted this. I did plot this one. I just left it off of this file. So in the middle of Missouri, we do have Jefferson City. That seemed pretty right to me. Iowa, Des Moines, and then I'm going to say that this one is probably Nebraska, but it could be in Iowa. It's hard to say for certain. Up towards the top of the map in Minnesota, we have Minneapolis. That seemed pretty right. We have this one, which I couldn't say for certain, like, is this a major metropolitan area? It didn't really seem like it, but I'm also not super familiar with Minnesota and Wisconsin. So it could be either in Minnesota or Wisconsin based off that location. I believe this one's just near a Great Lake, which that seemed to make sense to me. Again, this area of the map was a little more iffy, although interestingly enough, I did have more to geo-reference in around the Great Lakes because those were pretty visible on that image that you saw. So we had Wisconsin. I feel like this area around Chicago, Wisconsin, all of these seem pretty right to me. There seems to be a few near Chicago. And of course, we have semi-canon stuff taking place in the Chicago area. Definitely possible. The one on Springfield, it's shifted a little to my left. And I still think that's definitely Springfield because it's a capital. Indiana, one of the forgotten childs of this Fallout map for whatever reason. I was shocked. There's not even something where I feel like it could be confused for being Indianapolis because there's nothing close to it. Like, it is very far away from Indiana. I think the only thing that could possibly be in Indiana is this one that is close to like the Chicago metropolitan area. However, it still seems to be pretty much in Illinois, which was interesting. Michigan, we had one pretty kind of like in the middle of the mitten. I'm not, again, familiar with this area a lot. I've never been to Michigan, but I'm going to say probably Grand Rapids, based off like what I know about the state. Kentucky, pretty much Louisville, Lexington. It was between the two. It's a big dot, so it's imperfect, but Tennessee, Nashville, it's like near dead on in Nashville. I'm going to say that one's pretty definitive. And then in this area towards the east, Knoxville would be my guess. Again, these look how big this dot is, like for the area. That's the white part. It's pretty big. Alabama. I'm going to say it's probably meant to be Montgomery. Again, this is not a perfect way to do this. You're getting lens distortion from the image. You're getting the glare. It's not perfect, but I'm going to say it's probably meant to be in Montgomery. It's close. Like the periphery of this dot does touch Montgomery, but I just kind of plotted these dots dead center. All right. Tallahassee, that one seemed pretty easy. And then in Florida, in that other sequence, we did see one here. I think this is meant to be more towards Orlando, but it is covered up in this image. So it was kind of hard to say for certain. Now we have two in the Atlanta area, the major Atlanta area, I would say. Again, with distortions, it's imperfect. And then this one, I believe, is meant to be in Savannah, but it does end up kind of being on the South Carolina side of this map. Now getting into actual South Carolina, we kind of have one in the middle here. Again, harder to reference because, you know, this lady is kind of blocking it, but I did go a little bit off of the other image and it seemed correct for North Carolina with Charlotte at the very least, as well as over here in this area of North Carolina. Virginia, we have a few, and I think some of these dots are representative of multiple vaults. It's kind of hard to say. We have a few, but this area of the U.S. is so many vaults. Like obviously West Virginia has an absolute ton, which would make sense for Fallout 76. Ohio has a good amount, and they both made sense geographically where they were. Again, this area of the map is a bit more accurate because I was able to go off of the Great Lakes for georeferencing. So it ends up being a little bit more accurate in these areas where I had more locations to reference, whereas the rest of the map is just a dark map with lights on it, and it's impossible to say, is this on a city or is it not? Whereas the Great Lakes, I have these physical things to work off of to say, oh yes, this is for certain this area. So Ohio, Columbus, and Mason, that seemed pretty right to me. Obviously, West Virginia just has a ton. Like this feels right. For 76 has a lot of vaults for such a small area. Maybe just because the Appalachians are intense and that's what they wanted to do. Virginia itself, obviously, we have a ton. We have a lot in the DC area. This makes sense. Again, I think these white dots are representative of multiple vaults. But because it's just one white dot indicates one vault in the scene, I'm just leaving it as one that I added these little triangles to. Moving on, we have some in Maryland, obviously, because it's right on the border with Washington here. Nothing in Delaware, it appeared. But there was one in New Jersey. I thought that was fun. I think this might be more towards Atlantic City if I'm going to like place a bet on where it actually is. But again, I'm just plotting where they are. Another one on the border here. Hard to say specifically where it is. Again, this area of the map is a bit harder to identify everything. Pennsylvania, pretty interesting. Pretty in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania. This one I was questioning over and over again because it does appear like it could either be in New Jersey or in New York State, specifically in New York City. Like this is Manhattan right here. So I'm going to say it's possible, but this bad boy is in Manhattan. Again, it's hard to say. And in the lore of Fallout, New York City is pretty destroyed. Then we have another one north here. And then in New York State, we do have a few, actually like 2. This made sense to me, just kind of in the middle. Massachusetts went hard, of course, Fallout 4. This all seemed relatively accurate, and I did have more geography to reference here. On the underlying map, you could kind of see the curve. There appeared to be one in the water. I am going to be pulling in-game maps in to compare this to, so it'll be interesting to look at, where actually is all that? It is kind of fascinating to think about this one potentially being in the water. I'm not remembering that in Fallout 4, but I might just be not remembering it. Moving along, obviously we have nothing in Connecticut, and Rhode Island appears to have a vault in Providence. I like that. And I think they tried to keep as accurate to the games as possible. Again, these dots can represent multiple vaults, in my opinion. New Hampshire seems to be skipped, although there are some right on the border. Vermont kind of has one dead center of Vermont. It wasn't quite in Burlington because it just didn't seem far enough north. And then we also have one in Maine. Again, it's not centralized, although this area was harder to map due to the glare. And then, interestingly enough, I don't think I covered it, but Baja California. Fun, right? I loved that. So that is the general idea of the maps in the Fallout show. I am pulling images from the show. I'm trying to tile them together. That is actually called a raster image, and we're gonna tile them together to better geo-reference to get a better idea. So this will change and is subject to changing. But you guys can keep an eye and poke around this file if you want. You can even move the vaults around if you want. I have it on my Discord server. So thank you so much for watching this video, checking me out. I really appreciate it. I am doing more with this. I'm also a grad student and I'm in the middle of finishing my thesis. So, I'm pretty busy, but my draft is due literally tomorrow and I will have a lot more time. So thank you for checking me out. Thank you so much to IGN for writing this article. If you want to support this project, you can use my affiliate links, watch my content all the way through. It helps me out. I appreciate you guys watching. Stay safe in the wasteland, and I'll catch you in the next video. The hashtag for this project is Fallout Mapping Project. Thanks. Have a good one.